Best known for their 2D gameplay and graphics, Street Fighter games from the 90s are classics. Street Fighter 2, Alpha, and 3 all hold up today, and they cemented the series as a cornerstone of the fighting game genre. While I'm intimately familiar with all these games, there was always one spin-off that I never played as a kid. I would always hear word about the infamous Street Fighter game where the graphics went 3D, and the characters looked like they were made out of cardboard. No, not you, Street Fighter 4, although you know I love you. After a decade of knowing about this game but not having played it, I decided to try out the well-known Street Fighter EX. Seeing combos like this interested me heavily as a pretty hardcore Marvel vs. Capcom player, so I wanted to see how Street Fighter EX stood up next to its 2D cousins. Released in late 1996 and developed by Arika, Street Fighter EX took the series in a radical new direction. It was the first game in the series to feature 3D polygonal graphics, and while it still operates on a 2D field, meaning you can't sidestep like in Tekken for example, all the characters and stages are 3-dimensional in nature, making walking into the arcade and seeing paper mache Ryu throwing out a weird looking hurricane kick an unforgettable experience. A year later, in 1997, Street Fighter EX Plus, an update to the game, was released in arcades, as well as EX Plus Alpha, the home console version that was released exclusively on PS1. Without knowing what to expect, I fired the game up and jumped into the world of Street Fighter EX. Let's begin properly by discussing the game's development. It all started when Akira Nishitani, Capcom legend and designer of Street Fighter 2 thought, if we make a polygonal Street Fighter, what would it look like? Not much is known about how it went from an idea in Nishitani's head to a greenlit project with both Capcom and Arika involved, but there does exist some information out there. In addition to Nishitani, Junichi Ono, creator and lead planner of Darkstalkers, also worked on Street Fighter EX as a planner. In a massive interview conducted by Sega Saturn magazine about EX in issue 14 from pages 91 to 95, Ichiro Mihara, the vice president of Arika, stated that they used Street Fighter Alpha 2 as the foundation for EX. The development team faced many troubles during development as they had to figure out the overall game speed, how the characters should look when they interact, and more. Mihara stated that during this interview the game was only around 25 to 30% complete, so it goes without saying that the developers had lots of their work cut out for them after this interview concluded. What's interesting about the game is that before its launch, Capcom had shipped another 3D fighting game, Star Gladiator. Mihara states that Star Gladiator ran at 30 frames a second, but EX runs at 60 frames a second, and I think this is a huge improvement in terms of gameplay between the two. What I found interesting is that this interview is, again, from issue 14 of the magazine's history, which from my research I found means that it was released in around December of 1996, the same month that the game came out. They couldn't have gone from around 25% complete to shipping the game in its entirety in less than a month, so this interview must be old. How old, I really don't know, but I estimate it to be from around late 1995 to early 1996. With all of that out of the way, let's dive into the gameplay of Street Fighter EX. Despite looking completely different to the main Street Fighter series, the basic controls of EX are completely the same. You can walk, jump, dash, and attack with the series standard 6-button layout. Ryu, for example, may look like nothing special, as his normals and specials are pretty basic, but one thing I found interesting was his hurricane kick. In Street Fighter EX, this move is a wrecker, meaning you have to input the motion multiple times to get follow-up attacks, and this also applies to Ken, Akuma, and other Shotos. Two mechanics introduced into the game are the guard break system and the super cancel system. Firstly, if you press two buttons of the same strength, so heavy punch and heavy kick for example, with 1 bar of meter, you wind up and break the enemy's guard on hit, allowing you to score a combo. This is good to use against enemies who like to block a lot, but the lengthy startup animation does leave you open, so there is some risk to this mechanic. Lastly, when you're doing a super, you can cancel it into another super if you have the right amount of meter. You know how in Marvel vs. Capcom you can do a delayed hyper combo into your next character by inputting one of their super commands? This is exactly the same thing, and it's super awesome. You can score some really good damage with this mechanic. I know this game overall is super old, but I have to admit I had way more fun with it than I thought I would. The movement feels responsive, combos are satisfying to pull off, the damage is high, and the characters look and sound awesome, so I think Capcom and Arika knocked it out of the park with EX. There's a wide variety of character archetypes too, so for example, Zangief and Durun are your slow moving but high damage grapplers, Ryu, Ken and Akuma are your Shotos, Doctrine Dark is your gimmick character, Crackerjack is your Balrog function. No, literally, even his moves have the same names as Balrog's moves. and Skullomania is your crazy Joker character who actually does some really good damage surprisingly. Street Fighter EX has lots of character archetypes for all kinds of players, which is excellent to see. I also thought it was interesting how meter works in this game. Instead of games like Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Darkstalkers where the meter is split up into levels, with numbers representing which level you're on, EX's meter is one giant bar split up into 3 chunks. I like this change a lot. It makes knowing how much meter you have very clear and easy to understand, so it's very easy to read in the heat of battle. So far so good, this game is really awesome. As for the game's content, it has some pretty cool offerings. First up is Arcade Mode. There are 10 stages in this mode with a final boss against M. Bison, and if you reach Bison without losing a single round, you can also fight Akuma as a secret final boss, and I think it's awesome how they kept that in EX. Next up is Team Battle. You pick a team of 5 characters and fight against another team of 5, so this is pretty much just Team Battle from Tekken. Survival Mode also makes an appearance, and this involves you having to fight lots and lots of enemies until you're eventually defeated, so it's pretty standard. Watch Mode is up next, and while this may seem interesting because of the weird name, it's just a way to watch the AI fight itself. You can press R1 to change camera angles, and you can even spectate from a first-person perspective if you're so inclined. Versus Mode is up next, and this is obvious to everyone who has ever played a fighting game, so I don't need to explain it. Time Attack is also here, but what's cool about it is that you can select a specific course to play with a variety of enemies to battle. There are also special courses dedicated to a specific character if you just want to play a single battle against a really strong enemy. Finally, there's Practice Mode. Well, there are 2 modes hidden within, the first of which is Training Mode, which is just your standard training mode where you can program a training dummy to do various things, but there's also Expert Mode. This is my favourite mode in the entire game, and it's pretty much just a combo trial mode. As you progress through these combo trials, your score in the bottom right gets higher and higher. The higher the number gets, the more content you unlock, like new characters. This is awesome, as it rewards you for doing well and learning combos by giving you even more stuff to do. These combos are sick, and while I find some of them hard to do on my pad, they're a pretty good challenge to participate in. My favourite set of trials are Skullomanias because it taught me how I can combo into his wacky moves to get lots of damage. You thought Street Fighter 6's single player content was rewarding? Nah fam, try EX instead. When the arcade version of the game released in late 1996, reviews were somewhat mixed. The only notable review I could find for the arcade version was from Next Generation magazine on page 103 of issue 27. They gave the game 2 out of 5 stars and stated, "But in the end, SFEX is just kind of sad, with many favourite characters clunkily forced into 3D. But Capcom is at least moving forward, and better games will result through attempts like this." Luckily for Capcom, the game fared way better when it was released on the PS1. Reviews were universally positive, with Next Generation returning to the game to give it a 4 out of 5. Overall, scores range from anywhere between an 8 to a 9 out of 10, which is excellent, and a significant improvement from the arcade's reception. I think the extra content added into the PS1 version went a long way in making the game better overall, especially the new characters which critics also loved. Returning fan favourites like Dalsum and Sakura, along with newcomers like Pullum, Skullomania and Garuda, sweeten the deal for fans and critics alike. Overall, EX is really, really awesome, and my only regret is that I didn't play it sooner. It's super fun, and if you like the Capcom Versus series or fast-paced fighting games in general, definitely give it a shot. I'm going to keep playing this game casually until my hands fall off because of how satisfying it is to play. Thanks for watching, I hope you had fun, and I'll see you in the next one.